Today I will be presenting before you the male reproductive system of human being, and in this I will be presenting the topic, dividing that into 4 segments. The first one being the male reproductive organ, that is called the testis, and over the plural form will be this one, and the male reproductive organ, testis, plural form is that, and the next one is accessory ducts, and the third one being accessory glands, and after accessory glands the external genitalia. So let's start with the male reproductive organ, the testis. The testis in human male is present in a structure which is called scrotum. The scrotum is outside the abdomen. Since the testis is present within the scrotum outside the abdomen, we call it as extra-abdominal testis, and that is required because the spermatogenesis can comfortably happen within the male gonad at a temperature below the body temperature, and that's why the environment within the scrotum would be 2 to 2.5 degrees centigrade lesser than the body temperature. So when we look at the anatomy of the testis, testis is covered by a connective tissue which is called tunica albuginea. So tunica albuginea is the covering around the testis. It divides the testis into testicular lobules around 250. Suppose this is the testis covered by the tunica albuginea, and this will move inside like this to form the septum and dividing the testis into the lobule. This is what is called the lobule, testicular lobule. The picture here, if you can see, this is the scrotum and this one is the testis, and we can call it as extra abdominal testis, temperature 2 to 2.5 degrees centigrade lesser than the body temperature. Now let us study the testicular lobule. In this diagram you can easily evaluate the thought. See this. This is the one which you have learned just now. The testis is having the tunica albuginea. See this partitions here, the partitions which are nothing but extensions of those tunica albuginea, and we can see the lobule containing seminiferous tubules. So the lobules will have seminiferous tubules, as you can see in the picture, seminiferous tubules, and in between the seminiferous tubules the liquid, the fluid can be called as the interstitial fluid. Now seminiferous tubule, each seminiferous tubule, you can see the seminiferous tubule there, about 1 to 3 in each testicular lobule, testicular lobule about 1 to 3, and within the seminiferous tubule we will find the tall Sertoli cells, and in between we find the germinal epithelial cells. The germinal epithelial cells, the germ cells, will perform a process called spermatogenesis to produce the male gametes which are called the sperms. The various stages or events in the spermatogenesis we will discuss in the topic called gametogenesis. I just recall seminiferous tubules 1 to 3 and lined by the germinal epithelium, and they are in between you can see the Sertoli cells, and now Sertoli cells will be nourishing the developing sperms, and it also releases substances like inhibin, and seminiferous tubules lumen will have the release of the sperms which are released enter into the lumen of seminiferous tubules. Now let's see the next aspect, which is called as accessory ducts. All the seminiferous tubules from the various lobules. So the lobules, from the lobules there is seminiferous tubules. The seminiferous tubules continue and enter into an area called the reticulum. testis. And as you see here, a network, seminiferous tubules leading into a network. You can see this network, a tubules here. We can call them as the rete testis. See the continuation. The continuation of the rete testis is vasa efferentia. Of course, singular is called the vas efferens, but the plural is the vasa efferentia. They are opening into this system called epididymis. The epididymis is divisible into the corpus, the caput here, caput epididymis, the caput, the corpus and the cauda. Caput, corpus and finally the cauda. The cauda continues as the vas deferens. Now let's study the journey of the vas deferens. The vas deferens, which is coming out like that, you can see this coming out all through there, okay, and it's moving up, and this vas deferens as it's coming out of the scrotum will just wind around the urinary bladder, and as it is proceeding it will receive the content of seminal vesicle. So the vas deferens is continuing, moving out of the scrotum, winding around the urinary bladder, and it is also receiving the content of the seminal vesicle. And once it receives the content, the duct is called ejaculatory, and that will open into the urethra. Urethra, which is also receiving the urine from the urinary bladder, can also receive the sperms and the seminal vesicle secretions. So urethra is common for both sperms and also the expulsion of the semen. So we can call it as urinogenital duct. The urinogenital duct opens out through an opening called the urethral meatus. And after accessory ducts, the next is accessory glands. The accessory glands which support the male reproductive system will include the accessory glands which support the male reproductive system will include like this. I am taking only the accessory glands. The seminal vesicle, 2 in number, seminal vesicle. The prostate gland, which is 1 in number, 1 unpaired structure, and the third one, which is the bulbourethral glands, which is again 2 in number. Now these glands, the accessory glands, the secretion from seminal vesicle, secretion from the prostate gland, secretion from the bulbourethral, all together, the mixture of all will be called as the semen. Of course, the main component will be the sperms within that. So sperms plus the secretions of all these will form the semen. Every gland here will have its own role to play. For example, the seminal vesicle. A seminal vesicle will be giving the required nutrients, adding nutrients into the seminal plasma like fructose. That's why when you take the total composition of the glands and also the seminiferous tubules, sperms plus fructose plus citric acid plus enzymes, proteolytic enzymes, acid phosphatases and calcium, etc. So you can see it's a varied composition and it has too many things in it, and this is called the semen. And the seminal plasma, you can say seminal plasma contains fructose, citric acid, proteolytic enzymes, acid phosphatases, calcium, and finally the principal component will be the sperms or the male gametes. And during the coitus, the intermittent organ, the penis, which is nothing but the external genitalia, will be useful in transferring the semen into the female genital tract. Let's see the first one for the picture here to understand the basic structure of the intermittent organ called the penis. Now this one here, the penis is an external part of external genitalia, and the skin which is present on the penis, okay, this is the skin which is present on the penis, and at the ending, you know, at the tip of the penis, we call this as the prepuce. It's called prepuce, foreskin, sometimes called the foreskin. And this is the urethral meatus through which the urine, semen is released out, discharged out. And this sensitive part, conical here, the sensitive part, is called as the glans penis. Before we conclude the male reproductive system, let us evaluate the various things at a glance, the words, the terminology required. Testis, the accessory glands, the accessory ducts, the glands, and finally the external genitalia. Four important aspects. The first one, testis, recall extra-abdominal testis, the temperature lesser than the body, scrotum, extra-abdominal testis, and the seminiferous tubules, Sertoli cells and germ cells which produce the sperms by spermatogenesis, and in between the seminiferous tubules. In between the seminiferous tubules, you will find the endocrine cells, the interstitial cells, which produce the male sex hormone called the androgen. So, seminiferous tubules, interstitial cells, production of the male sex hormone called the androgen. Then after that, recall this, the glands, the ducts. The ducts is the rete testis, vasa efferentia, epididymis, vas deferens, ejaculatory duct, and finally the urethra, which is called urinogenital duct. The glands will be the seminal vesicles, the prostate gland, and the bulbourethral glands. Finally, the external genitalia, which is nothing but the penis, and that is during for insemination, where the semen is discharged into the female genital tract. The second segment of the reproductive biology will be the female reproductive system. So, female reproductive system, as we have divided the male reproductive system into the four segments, we can do the same thing even for the female reproductive system. Ovaries, singular, and this is plural, ovaries, and that is about the gonad, and that is next one is the accessory ducts, next aspect is accessory glands, and finally the external genitalia. See, the line of thinking between the male and the female is almost parallel, as you are seeing the categorization of the learning process. Here, when you study the ovary, okay, a single ovary, as you can examine in the picture adjacent here, you can see the ovary which are present here. This is a superficial view of the ovary, and if you look at the other one, this is partly the anatomy of that, wherein you can see within the ovary the various stages of development. We can call it as the follicle growth. You can see the primary, secondary, the tertiary, all follicles present within the ovary. See, ovary. The ovary, which is the primary sex organ in a female, this is primary sex organ called the ovary. What are the principal functions of an ovary? Ovary does primarily release of the male, the making of the gamete, the making of the ovum, and the production of the female sex hormones called the estrogen and the other one, the progesterone. So, the ovary is not only a primary sex organ, it is also producing the hormones by name the estrogen and progesterone, of course at different times. The ovary is well present in the abdomen, well connected to the surrounding tissues by the fibers, the collagen fibers. We can call it as the ligaments. And ovary is anatomically divided into how many regions? Let's study that part. Sometimes this outer covering, this one, at times called mesovarium, which is sometimes called in some animal areas called mesovarium. So this one is the ovary, right? This is the areas which I am dividing the ovary. It can be like this. This is the area which is at the periphery, which is called the germinal epithelium. Just like the male reproductive system having the germinal epithelium within the seminiferous tubules, this ovary is having entirely lined by the germinal epithelial cells influenced by the gonadotropins, especially the follicle stimulating hormone. After germinal epithelium, there is one area which is like this, tunica albuginea, and you can take the next one as the stroma. See, I put two lines here. One is the outer part of the stroma, other is the inner part of the stroma. This one is the cortex and this one is the medulla, and we can call it as stroma, and the tissue which is present in that is generally termed as the stromal tissue. The ovary, the two ovaries, as you can see, one here and the other one that side, in the abdominal cavity, having about 4 regions within germinal epithelium, tunica albuginea, and the stroma divisible into the cortex and the medulla. Cortex will be having the developmental stages called the follicles, the primary follicle, before that the primordial follicle, primary, secondary, tertiary. All these follicles are well spread out in within that cortex of the stroma. And after the primary sex organ called the ovary, having 4 regions and producing the secondary oocyte during ovulation, and also the sex hormones estrogen and progesterone. Let's start the accessory ducts of the female reproductive system. Now, when you study this topic called the accessory ducts, we start with the fallopian tube. We start with the word fallopian tube. After that, there is another one called the cervix, cervical canal, and then the other one called the vagina. So, let's study the fallopian tube on one side. If you can see the fallopian tube here, this one is having this margin with all the projections like this. This one is called the Fimbriae. The folds here, the margin folds, the one is welcoming the secondary oocyte into that is this one, the Fimbriae. The Fimbriae will receive the secondary oocyte from the ovary into the fallopian tube. So the Fimbriae here, the fallopian tube having the Fimbriae, this is fallopian tube, Fimbriae helping in receiving the secondary oocyte. Now the fallopian tube is like this overall. Now this fallopian tube is divided into 3 areas. This one is called the infundibulum, ampulla, and the isthmus. We generally highlight the junction between the ampulla and the isthmus, call it as ampullo-isthmic junction, which is the site of syngamy or the fertilization. So fallopian tube into 3 regions. So the first one, I am talking or explaining about this fallopian tube. The fallopian tube divisible into 3 regions, and that is infundibulum closer to the Fimbriae, and the next one called the ampulla, and the last one is called the isthmus. This is 3 regions. Infundibulum, ampulla, and isthmus are the 3 regions of the fallopian tube. Infundibulum, as you see, a bit wider one, and that is leading into the ampulla, and this junction between the ampulla and the isthmus, it is called ampullo-isthmic junction, site of fertilization, and finally a bit narrow narrow tube, that is isthmus, leading into the next part called the cervix, which is having a cervical canal. what are the functions of the fallopian tube? The fallopian tube lined by the columnar cells which are ciliated, and here and there they are interspersed by the peg cells. The columnar ciliated epithelium of the fallopian tube receive the secondary oocyte, allow it to move forward and make it reach the site of fertilization, and if fertilization happens, the early stages of development will be within the fallopian tube, and that journey continues. The embryo's journey continues into the uterus, and where implantation will occur. I'm sorry, I forgot the word. Yeah, I'm very sorry. I forgot the word called the uterus. Very sorry. This is fallopian tube, and that is followed by the uterus, and that is followed by the next one called the cervix, and finally the vagina. So this is uterus, cervix and the vagina. Let's start our journey into the story of this uterus. So we were talking about the accessory ducts in a female reproductive system. Actually, while writing I forgot this word uterus, I'm sorry. So this is the fallopian tube followed by this uterus, and as you see, next is cervix having the canal, and then finally the vagina. Okay. The fallopian tube, uterus, cervix and the vagina. Fallopian tube, as I was talking, divisible into three: infundibulum, the ampulla and finally the isthmus. Isthmus is the one which continues into the uterus. I already spoke to you about the functions of the fallopian tube: transportation of ovum, transportation of secondary oocyte, fertilization of the ovum, and then transportation of the early stages into the next called the uterus. What are the basic parts of the uterus? The anatomy, the wall of the uterus. The basic parts, the wall of the uterus. See, when you see the wall of the uterus needs to be quite muscular, thick. It will have these parts called the perimetrium, and the middle myometrium, and finally the endometrium. So perimetrium, myometrium, endometrium are the three regions of the uterus. Perimetrium is the outermost covering of the uterus, and the muscular myometrium, and the innermost lining called the endometrium. Now, myometrium will certainly have the smooth muscles, and these smooth muscles influenced by progesterone during pregnancy, later on influenced by the oxytocin. Definitely the musculature of uterus will help in the developing fetus, the support. At the time of parturition, it plays much more significant role. The contractions of the smooth muscles within the wall will facilitate the childbirth, which is called the parturition. Innermost lining is called the endometrium. Endometrium, the innermost lining, undergoes several changes during the menstrual cycle. The innermost layer, the cells are removed, cast off during the menstrual cycle. Again, they are regenerated, and of course, if the pregnancy happens, and all through the pregnancy, the endometrium is well designed to accommodate the next generation in the wall and support it. After uterus, the next one is cervix. You can see here the uterus leads into the next part called cervix. This is between the uterus and the vagina. Now, this cervix, the region here, this area is called cervical canal. Now, this and this can be together called the birth canal. It's called birth canal. The next one, after the birth canal, let's study the final vagina. Vagina is certainly lined by stratified compound epithelium, and into which the semen is discharged. and vagina opens out to the vaginal orifice. The external genitalia of a female. In the female reproductive system, we have done the ovary and we have done the accessory ducts. Recalling the accessory ducts, they are fallopian tube with 3 regions in that. Then there is a uterus, and that is followed by the cervix, which leads into the vagina. The important terminology: fallopian tube divisible into 3 regions in infundibulum, ampulla, isthmus, and closer to the ovary, the foldings of the margin called as the Fimbriae. Fallopian tube opening into the uterus, uterus having 3 layers: endometrium, myometrium smooth muscles, and the endometrium, which undergoes the cyclical changes during the menstrual cycle and is also useful in the implantation of the blastocyst. Cervix with the cervical canal and the vagina together called the birth canal. Let's go into the next part called the external genitalia of a female. So when we study the external genitalia of a female, it will be like this. This part, which I am depicting here, showing here, is the mons pubis. It's the mons pubis. The mons pubis of a female is fleshy, skin is with the hair, and the mons pubis will be continuing on the both sides, and we can call this region as the labia majora. Now, in fact, the labia majora will be the peripherals to external peripherals to the vagina, and here exactly at the margin of the vestibule here this area which I am marking like this, it's the labia minora, and here is the clitoris in a female. Here is the clitoris, the sensitive structure. Clitoris is at this region. So this is the mons pubis continuing as the labia majora, and these two which are forming the rim or the boundary of this vestibule region. Here this is the vestibule, and that is called the labia minora. So mons pubis, labia majora, labia minora. Then this is the clitoris, and within this there is the urethral opening and also the vaginal opening, through which the young one, the head is the first structure to come out during the parturition, and that is this opening. These are all the external genitalia of a female. The words mons pubis, labia majora, labia minora, and the region inside is the vestibule, and this is the clitoris at the margins of the labia minora. What are the various accessory glands? The accessory glands in a female: the Bartholin glands. The Bartholin glands. The Bartholin glands are present closer to the vaginal orifice. Now within this, there's many more glands like lesser vestibular also, but my focus is on this important gland called the Bartholin glands. The covering of this vaginal orifice will have hymen. Hymen is partially open, this hymen here, and the hymen is not exactly a sign of the virginity. The presence or absence of it doesn't signify the virginity in a female, but hymen is a partially covering the vaginal orifice, and at times can be torn during any heavy horse riding or such other activity in a female. And normally this is torn during the first sexual intercourse. The last part of the female reproductive system will be the mammary glands. See, when we study the mammary glands in a female, this mammary glands will have deep inside lobes. The mammary glands will have lobes. The lobes will have alveoli. I think this is the site where the epithelial cells are present to make the milk in a female. Alveoli is followed by mammary tubules, the mammary ducts, lactiferous ducts, which finally open to the exterior through the teats or the nipples, releasing the milk. So, mammary glands in female are also a major important requirement apart from the various structures of the female reproductive system. Overall, when we take into account the role of a female reproductive system and also the mammary glands, it will be ovulation, fertilization, the implantation, and of course all through the gestation period there is support and parturition, and after that the child, the care of the young one through the lactation. Let us conclude this topic of the male and female reproductive systems, the reproductive biology, by comparing the male and female reproductive systems like this. See, the principal reproductive organ, the primary sex organ, is the testis here, and in the FRS it is the ovary. This group of accessory ducts and this group of the accessory ducts here, rete testis, vasa efferentia, epididymis, vas deferens, all these will receive the sperms, store the sperms, transport the sperms. And in the female, the fallopian tube, the uterus, cervix and the vagina, as you can see the picture on there. The fallopian tube was receiving the secondary oocyte, fertilization, transportation of the zygote, then again the developmental stages, early embryonic stages, passing into the uterus, site of implantation, and again these two, the cervical canal together with the vagina, the birth canal. So, this is accessory ducts here, and this is external genitalia, and these are all again external genitalia in a female, the mons pubis, labia majora, labia minora, and also the clitoris, and the mammary glands, which are functional and here of course non-functional, and the important accessory glands, the Cowper's gland or the bulbourethral gland, the prostate gland, seminal vesicle, and here I have taken one of the major important one, and that is the Bartholin glands. And in the males, let me remind you, the urethra is called the urinogenital duct, which opens out through urethral meatus, and here the entire reproductive system of the male and female are independent, present in two different organisms, the male and the female. Therefore, human beings will be certainly unisexuals and with internal fertilization, and these are eutherian mammals. There is certainly gestation period after which the young one takes its birth. The ultimate objective of any topic would be attempting questions and picking up the right answer, that too in a short time or lesser duration. What are the possible areas where you can expect good questions from the reproductive biology? First, of course, one word direct answer could be, that is one option, directly one word. For example, seminiferous tubules are lined by Sertoli cells and the spermatogonia. That's a straightforward answer. Or another type, in between the seminiferous tubules, the presence of endocrine cells called the Leydig producing testosterone. So that's a straight answer. And second possibility, sequence. In the male, that sequence of the sperm path is a very good sequence, like from the seminiferous tubules, the rete testis, vas efferentia, the epididymis, vas deferens, ejaculatory duct, urethra, into the vagina to the urethral meatus. So sequence. And in the fallopian tube, the order from the Fimbriae to the uterus, the order of arrangement of the parts of fallopian tube. So sequence question is possible. Next, match the following. Matching type. So in this matching type, what you can do is, you can recall important cells of a male, glands of a male, the glands of a female, and what do they do, what products or what content do they discharge. And fourth one, the possibility will be how you can interrelate this topic with endocrinology, the hormones acting. For example, FSH acting on the germinal epithelium and making the cells increase in number, promoting the gametogenesis. Likewise, these are all the possible questions which can be expected in the reproductive biology area in the NEET exam.